Hi, my name is Suzie. I'm an activist and a journalist from Auckland, New Zealand. For years, I've worked on controversial issues like the corruption of our intelligence agencies. I was severely targeted as a result of my work. This led to my articles being amplified by the world's most accomplished publisher. In 2016, I made a documentary about how and why I was forced to leave my country. I have now sought refuge in Russia, and my situation has become public.
On 882 6PR, the voice of Perth.
It's 12:30 right now, and Tony with you, and I'm really happy we finally got through to Moscow to my friend over there, Suzie Dawson.
You're listening to a 95BFM podcast.
Suzie Dawson is a Kiwi activist and journalist who worked as a member of Occupy Auckland's media team at that time. Now, 5 years later, and following involvement in GCSB and TPPA opposition, she's seeking asylum in Russia, alleging she has been spied on, harassed and threatened by the police.
Welcome back to The Wire. Now, finally on the show today, last week it was announced that Suzie Dawson will be the new leader of the Internet Party.
Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We have a special guest with us. It's Suzie Dawson. She's an activist, journalist, former party leader, and current president of the Internet Party.
Suzie Dawson, an activist and citizen journalist currently seeking asylum in Moscow. Suzie has written extensively on surveillance and the deep state and claims it's not safe for her in New Zealand.
My name is Craig Tuck. I'm a lawyer from New Zealand. I act in the area of international human rights. I act for Suzie Dawson, along with a group of other lawyers throughout the world who act for journalists and dissenters in high-profile cases, including the case of Julian Assange. As far back as 2012, Suzie has been trying to warn New Zealanders and other citizens around the world about state targeting and surveillance of citizens and the methods being used to do it.
Surveillance in New Zealand is now so widespread, it's not an issue of police going and getting a warrant and doing an investigation and then it all coming out in court. The vast majority of the surveillance that's undertaken is never going to be aired in a courtroom. And by that I'm talking about cell phone technologies, I'm talking about lawful interception is the term that the companies that do this like to use. There is a corporation in Wellington, New Zealand called SSI Corp, and you can Google them and you can look at their website. And on their website, they're so good as to explain at length exactly what they do and how legal it is for them to do it. And essentially, they can intercept virtually any communication. If they have someone at range, they can hear your actual conversations, but also through cell phones, they can essentially turn them into microphones and hear any conversation that's had within vicinity. They can see your text messages, they can see what photos are on your phone, they can see what files are on your phone, they can read your emails, they can just intercept all kinds of information.
Any intelligence service in the world that has significant funding and a real technological research team can own that phone the minute it connects to their network. As soon as you turn it on, it can be theirs. They can turn it into a microphone, they can take pictures from it, they can take the data off of it. But it's important to understand that these things are typically done on a targeted basis.
Not only was Suzie essentially blowing a whistle on state-level spying, she was naming the precise entities that years later it would be proven had in fact been doing it.
And the fact that these are private corporations that are doing it should be really concerning to us. The crowd that they outsourced it to was TCIL, which was, I believe, Thompson & Clark Investigations Limited. The state is contracting a private company to surveil you. To me, that's really immoral, absolutely immoral.
Some 6 years later, in December 2018, an official State Services Commission report confirmed that New Zealand government agencies had been employing Thompson & Clark Investigations Limited to target New Zealand citizens. This is a private company that had essentially been instructed by state agencies and departments to spy on citizens.
More than than a dozen police staff are under investigation for passing sensitive information to the private investigators Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark.
Security firm Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark.
So Thompson and Clark, aren't some of them old police officers?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so does that explain the relationship and the free flow of information? Doesn't it actually seem a bit crass?
Well, at the end of the day, I guess what I trust is people's intent.
The report identifies perhaps inappropriately close relationships, morning teas paid for by Thompson and Clark, invitations to go out for drinks. Were there other companies identified where you inappropriately gave them information, or just Thompson and Clark?
There are a myriad of security companies who inquire of police every day. For instance, insurance security.
But that's not my question. People listening to this will think, hey, Thompson and Clark were getting stellar, top shelf, gold star treatment from the police. Why? Do you treat other security firms the same as you were treating this one? How do you seriously think it looks to members of the public listening to this?
Thompson and Clark hasn't just been paid by the government to spy on Greenpeace and earthquake claimants in Christchurch. Tonight, Checkpoint can reveal the controversial security firm has been also monitoring the activities of another 3 activist groups in Northland, Coromandel and Wellington, and the activities of at least 1 further claimant.
Suzie has been involved at the very highest levels, with people facing charges from prosecutions coming out of the Eastern District Court of Virginia in the United States. There are more prosecutions to follow of currently unnamed persons. Importantly, information will be coming out in the months to come that will provide transparency and clarity and lead to accountability. Suppression and prosecution of dissenters can't be allowed in New Zealand or elsewhere. That's why Suzie's team is launching the hashtag 1versus5i campaign, and with your help can achieve some important victories for democracy and for each and every one of us.
Hi everyone, my name is Suzie Dawson. I'm an activist, a journalist, and the current president of the Internet Party of New Zealand. Welcome to my channel and also to Graham Elwood's channel, who is generously broadcasting or simulcasting this on YouTube. Tonight is the 4th episode of Opening the Five Eyes, Exposing the Spies, which is my new series that looks inside what's known as the global network of the spy agencies and follows this never-ending torrent of encroachment upon our human rights and civil liberties around the world, but particularly in the Western English-speaking countries. So tonight I had intended to do a surveillance teach-in, and I was going to go through a matrix that I created of all the different ways and methods by which we are spied on in this modern age. However, yesterday I took some time to read through a bill that has been tabled in the New Zealand Parliament this week. It's called the Terrorism Suppression Control Orders Bill. This bill is so scary and so dangerous to our democracy that I couldn't not cover it this week. Yesterday, I put together a really long thread, including screenshots of different provisions of the legislation. And tonight, I want to go through that with all of you, because I think it's of vital importance and it's a serious threat to everybody, but also particularly to myself, given that the bill is directed at New Zealanders who are overseas, outside of New Zealand, who may return to New Zealand shores. So given that I am living in exile outside of New Zealand, and I have been for the last 4 years, and given that counterterrorism, resources, personnel, networks, have been employed already against myself and against many of my associates, such as Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, Kim.com, and others. It's impossible for me to ignore that this bill, which is supposed to be aimed at terrorists and supposed to be about terrorism, may in fact, or is even highly likely to be abused by directing the powers that it grants the various police and intelligence agencies who can abuse it by using it to target people who aren't terrorists at all. So I'm going to start by taking you through the thread that I put together yesterday. So far, there's over 150,000 impressions on that thread, and several thousand people have interacted directly with the thread. So it's definitely getting some traction. It's definitely of interest to people. I'll just point out that in the past, across this decade, a series of terrorism and security bills have been passed through the New Zealand Parliament. Some of these have then had counterpart versions passed in other countries around the Five Eyes. For example, the 2013 GCSB bill in New Zealand, the GCSB being New Zealand's version of America's NSA. The GCSB bill passed in New Zealand first in August of 2013, but soon after it, versions of it travelled around the Western world. We had the Aussie Data Retention Act, the UK IP Bill, the America's USA Freedom Act, and also CSIS changes and CSIC changes in Canada as well, C51, etc. My initial fear when I saw this Terrorism Suppression Control Orders Bill was that it would, the same thing would happen, that a similar version would then get passed across the rest of the Five Eyes. However, I did some further investigation and I discovered that actually a version of this bill was already tabled and passed in Australia in 2014. And a version of this bill had also previously been passed in the UK as well, specifically relating to these control orders, as they're called. Now, what control orders are is a regime of punishments and restrictions that can be applied to a target by the agencies without that target ever having been arrested or charged or prosecuted or convicted of anything. That's one big part of why this is so dangerous, but there's a lot more to it. So I'm going to screen share now and we are going to work our way through this thread. So this is the thread that I wrote, and it actually refers directly to the thread that's within it. So we'll read that as well. But this is my initial synopsis. New Zealand's latest terrorism suppression bill allows authorities to deem you a terrorist on the balance of probability. These are the exact words in the legislation, on the balance of probability, without showing you evidence. Then they can control your work, finances, movements, internet access, and prevent you telling people it's happening. And so then I link to my original thread of analysis of this legislation. So all these screenshots you're about to see are directly from the bill itself. So at the very beginning of the bill, it says, for the purposes of this act, terrorism is facilitated or supported only if the facilitator or supporter knows or ought reasonably to know that terrorism is facilitated or supported. But this does not require that the facilitator or supporter knows or ought reasonably to know that any specific terrorism is facilitated or supported, or that any specific terrorism was foreseen or planned at the time that it was facilitated or supported, or that any terrorism was actually carried out. So let's just break that down for a second. What they're basically saying is, actually, you don't have to be a terrorist to be targeted by this bill. You just have to be someone who facilitates or supports a group or a terrorist organization, an organization that's been deemed to be a terrorist organization, that no terrorism actually needs to have been carried out. And you don't need to have even known that you don't need to have known or to have reasonably known that any specific terrorism is being facilitated or supported. So already we've gone from this is a bill about terrorists to actually this is a bill about people who might be connected to so-called terrorists to actually this is a bill that can be targeted at someone that doesn't even know that they have in some way supported or facilitated someone who's been deemed to be a terrorist. And it doesn't actually matter if no terrorism was ever actually undertaken. So like from the very beginnings of this bill already, it has gotten really murky, really fast as to whether this relates to terrorists at all. Moving on. This bill is the continuation of the principle of prosecution-only type hearings, where the defendant is not even notified of the action being taken against them, as with other recent security bills in New Zealand, which have allowed secret revocations of New Zealand passports of persons who are allegedly or purported threats to NatSec. And in the bill, it states that these control orders can be made without notice to the person, to the relevant person that they are being made against. Now, this is a major problem for a number of reasons, and this is an ongoing thread of conduct, an ongoing pattern in New Zealand. So recently, a very well-known media figure in New Zealand, Martin Bomber Bradbury, known as @CitizenBomber on Twitter. He's the publisher of the dailyblog.co.nz, but he has been a major radio and TV mainstream media figure for 20, 30 years now in New Zealand. He had taken a case against the police who had been making warrantless data requests on his banking information and had been interfering with his life, basically as political persecution because they weren't happy with Mr. Bradbury's political opinions and the activism that he'd been engaged in, particularly activism related to the GCSB bill that I mentioned earlier in 2013, which was about legalising mass surveillance in New Zealand and of New Zealand citizens. So out of retribution, they had been targeting him for political persecution. Now, in his case against them, they demanded to make it a secret hearing, a secret trial, and to be able to introduce secret evidence that only the judge could see, that Bradbury couldn't access or see at all. So how are you supposed to fight a case? How are you supposed to defend yourself if you aren't made aware of the so-called evidence that is being used against you? And in the case of these control orders, how are you supposed to defend against a control order being applied against you, calling you a terrorist or a terrorist supporter, if you don't even know that that order has been made? What it does is it completely strips the target of any ability to meaningfully oppose or get redress for this until it's already a done deal and it's already happening to them. And even that becomes difficult, as you'll see in a second. So, as I've just said, how are you supposed to defend against it if you don't know what you're being accused of and the evidence isn't supplied? And this is all to be done at the discretion of the police minister. So it says in the legislation, the application for the interim control order must be made without notice to the relevant person if it is made before they arrive in New Zealand, and may be made without notice to the relevant person if it's after they arrive in New Zealand, so before or after, and if the commissioner believes on reasonable grounds that it is necessary and appropriate to make the application without notice in order to manage the risks posed by the relevant person. So this is my favourite part. If the application for the interim control order is made on notice, or if they are told about it, the documents to be served must exclude any information supporting the application that is not disclosable supporting information. And when you go further down and read about what is and what isn't disclosable supporting information, evidence is not considered disclosable supporting information. Best of all, if you are subject to a control order of this nature, they have the ability to prevent you from ever leaving New Zealand for the term of the control order, or from possessing passports or other international travel documents of any kind issued by any country. So, given that we know that here I am living in exile in Russia, I've been here for over 3 years now. It's been nearly 5 years since I left New Zealand. Should I return to New Zealand, this bill would give the Commissioner of Police, and we know that police agencies have been directly involved in my targeting and with the targeting of other journalists and activists in New Zealand. It would give the Commissioner of Police the ability to apply for and be granted a control order against me without telling me before I even get back to New Zealand. And that then when I got back to New Zealand, they could prevent me from leaving New Zealand. They could essentially trap me back in New Zealand. And all they would need to do is claim that I am a supporter or facilitator of some kind of terrorist activity. Now, I was a co-founder of New Zealand for Gaza, which was against the relentless Israeli bombing of Gaza and the Palestinian people in 2014. They could easily claim that that makes me some kind of terrorist sympathizer or some nonsense supporter or facilitator of terrorism. We know that in early 2017, that the movement against the TPP in New Zealand was declared a threat to national security. It was declared that by the New Zealand police. TPPA No Way, which was the movement hashtag for that campaign, which trended #2 worldwide and is one of the most famous activism hashtags in New Zealand history. I was a co-founder of that hashtag and drove that campaign, that social media campaign. So yet again, they could claim that I am a threat to national security or affiliated with an organisation that is a threat to national security, and in theory apply such a control order to me before I return to New Zealand soil. Continuing on. So the provisions of the actual control order itself, there's a long, long list of things that they can do to you. One of them, though, that really stuck out for me is this. They can prohibit or restrict the relevant person from carrying out specified activities, including in respect of their work or occupation or recreational activities. They can also prohibit or restrict the relevant person from holding bank accounts, from possessing certain financial instruments or using specified financial services. So what does that mean if the person that they target is a journalist or a writer or a publisher? What does that mean? Does that mean they could prevent me from doing my journalism? They could prevent me from being an investigative reporter. They could prevent me from reporting on WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. They could prevent me from reporting on Gaza and Palestine or any of the other key areas and issues that I've been working on for years. That's what this reeks of to me, that it can be used as a basis to prevent you from undertaking entirely legal and protected democratically protected activities or protected democratic activities, which is obviously immoral, but certainly not beyond the realm of belief as to what the New Zealand police would do if given half the chance. So, other things that they can do to you. So now, without being arrested, without being charged with anything, without being able to defend yourself or to access any evidence against you, you are subjected to house arrest and monitoring, electronic monitoring with an ankle bracelet and the whole 9 yards, as if you'd been convicted of a crime. So you become, it's as if you become a convicted criminal, but without ever going through the usual legal process by which someone is convicted of something. So they can determine where you're allowed to live. They can tell you at what times of the day or night you must be at that address that they say that you should live at. They can require you to report to police at specified times and places, the same way that somebody who's on bail for an offence would, or who's on parole. They can require you to facilitate access by police or their agents, which is even scarier because now we're getting into private sector subcontractors, to premises, equipment, or information for monitoring compliance. For example, facilitating access to search the person's residence, electronic devices, or financial accounts. Require that the relevant person allow themselves to be photographed and impressions made of their fingerprints. So now you're supplying biometrics as if you've been arrested, even though you've never been arrested. To require that the relevant person submits to electronic monitoring of compliance with the requirements of the control order concerned, and that you do not tamper with or damage or do anything to interfere with the functioning of that electronic monitoring device. So you're basically being treated like a convicted criminal. It's as if you've been through a court process and a judge has handed down a sentence and there are now all these stipulations around your living situation, except for the small fact that you've actually never been arrested, you've never been through a court process, and you haven't been convicted of anything. So what they're doing is circumventing the entire legal process and issuing judgments against you without you ever having reviewed any of their so-called evidence that led to that judgment, without you having been able to defend against it. You just become a criminal without a court process. So in terms of the pushback against this bill in New Zealand, what we've been hearing is from people like Gores Garaman from the New Zealand Green Party saying, oh, well, what about what Iran thinks is a terrorist, or what about what China thinks is a terrorist, and maybe people will be discriminated against on those grounds. Well, I think the elephant in the room here isn't what China or Iran might think is a terrorist. I think the elephant in the room is what the United States might think is a terrorist, or what the United Kingdom might think is a terrorist, or what New Zealand might think is a terrorist. I'm personally far more concerned about that, because these are the countries that have been calling leakers and journalists and publishers and developers terrorists. These are the people that have been politically persecuting those of us who are seen to be in an information war, not a war with guns. This isn't. Julian Assange doesn't have any weapons. Julian Assange is not a terrorist. WikiLeaks are not terrorists. They're publishers. But counter-terrorism resources are being used against them. I have no military experience. I have no access to weapons. I couldn't fire a gun even if I had one, and nor would I ever want one, because I have no idea how to use weapons, and I don't want to even know how to use weapons. But terrorism resources have been used against me and used to target me. So this type of legislation could circumvent the necessity of ever having or providing any evidence against me. They would be able to just deem me to be a supporter or facilitator of terrorism without any basis for it. I mean, what scares me the most about this is that this is a way for them to punish and, in their words, control. That's why they're called control orders. This is a way for them to control people who they know that they couldn't successfully prosecute in a court of law, who they know that they have no basis to arrest, and that they would never make it through a trial process against. So they've decided that they'll just skip that entire legal process and be able to control that person, even though there's no prior legal grounds standing or basis for it. So here we go. This is the so-called standard of proof in the legislation. The standard of proof in the bill says this section applies to a question of fact arising in a proceeding that is a proceeding under this act and that is not a proceeding for an offence against this act. The question must be decided on the balance of probabilities. So this is the opposite of what a court is supposed to make a finding on. Okay, like a court is supposed to make a finding beyond reasonable doubt. That is the standard of evidence in a court, beyond reasonable doubt. So they watered this down. It's gone from beyond reasonable doubt to on the balance of probabilities. So this is it. Not only are they bypassing the entire court process, but they are weakening the evidential standard by which to apply for and be granted these control orders against unsuspecting people who have no ability to defend against the accusations. And it gets better. The icing on the cake, people who are targeted with this aren't even allowed to tell people that they are being targeted with this without getting a court's permission to admit that they have been targeted by it. And journalists are gagged under threat of prosecution if they report on it. So the bill states that there is an automatic suppression of identity of whoever is being targeted by these control orders. So your identity is suppressed whether or not you want it to be suppressed. It states, no person may publish in any report or account of the proceeding in which the court considers and determines the application, or as the case requires, makes, renews, varies, or discharges the control order, the person's name, address, or occupation, unless the court, by order, permits the publication. The court must make an order that permits the publication if the person applies to the court for such an order and the court is satisfied that the person understands the nature and effect of their decision to apply for the order, which means they could theoretically, even if you found out this thing had been done to you and you made an application for an order of the court to allow you to tell people that this is happening to you, the court could actually still decline to allow you to tell people this is happening to you under the claim that you don't understand the nature or effect of the decision to apply for the order. So just let that sink in for a second. They can control where you live, your movement, your hours, who you talk to and who you associate with or affiliating yourself with, what the nature of your work is, where you work, what type of work that you do. They can put you under electronic monitoring. They can force you to wear an ankle bracelet. They can force you to submit yourself and your belongings and your property to searches by them and or their agents, whoever their agents happen to be, which we know in New Zealand is private sector subcontractors, for-profit investigation and private intelligence companies. They can prevent you from leaving the country and travelling. And they can do all of this without arresting you, without charging you, without convicting you, without providing you with any evidence as to the basis for these decisions that have been made. And then you don't get to tell people that this is happening to you. And any journalist who, oh, that's the second screen there that I didn't show you. It is an offence to breach the automatic suppression of identity, and it's considered a reckless publication. Knowing a reckless publication, a person commits an offence if the person knowingly or recklessly publishes any name, address, occupation, or other information in breach of Section 32. So, if a journalist says, hey, exiled journalist Suzie Dawson has come home from New Zealand and a terrorism control order has been applied to her without notifying her, and she hasn't seen any of the evidence, and now all of these restrictions are placed on her life and she can't leave the country again, that journalist can be prosecuted. That journalist can have to go to court, and I think it was, fined several, I think a year in jail and fined several $1,000s. Let's see, in the case of an individual, a fine not exceeding $25,000, they can be fined up to $25,000, or in the case of a corporation, a fine not exceeding $50,000 if they admit that this is happening to me. And the only way to get around that is if I then somehow have the resources and ability to go to a court and convince a court that I should be allowed to tell the truth about what's happening to me, and to have that court agree, and then to strike down the automatic suppression before any journalist will even be able to report on what's happening. This is nuts. This is crazy, insane, anti-democratic, tyrannical, fascist nuts. And I want to say I can't believe my country's doing this, but to be honest with you, I can believe they're doing it because of everything else they're already doing. So part of their whole secret court thing that's been going on is in 2017, they decided they wanted to be able to revoke the passports of New Zealand citizens without telling the New Zealand citizen that they were revoking it. And in doing so, they have these secret court hearings. There's no defense present. It's a prosecution-only trial. Secret evidence is submitted in the secret court against a defendant that doesn't know they're a defendant and is never notified about it. And then there's a secret ruling, and then a secret revocation of the person's passport. So this is just a continuation of this whole insane subversion of the judicial system. There's, in my opinion, no excuse for it whatsoever. It's a total abuse of the judiciary and the rule of law. And it's a complete and utter violation of not just the Bill of Rights Act in New Zealand, but also Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It completely undermines the fundamental roles of government and of police agencies and of the courts and the judiciary. You're supposed to know what you're accused of. You're supposed to be able to see the evidence. You're supposed to be able to argue against it. You're supposed to be present for the hearing to have the ability to do that. And you are not supposed to be subject to arbitrary detention and punishments in the absence of a conviction from a court. And these are all principles that are being violated by this. And unsurprisingly, this is all being covered up in the New Zealand media by them saying, it's about ISIS. It's about foreign fighters. It's about blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, Tony Fullman was not a foreign fighter. Tony Fullman was a pro-democracy activist, a Kiwi, a New Zealander, and his passport was revoked by the New Zealand government. Why? Because he was a pro-democracy activist. Not because he was a terrorist, not because he was a member of ISIS. When 100 armed counter-terrorism squad members raided Kim.com's mansion on January 20... Come on, how's it escaped me? January 21st, 2012, they rolled up at Kim.com's mansion. They had attack dogs and helicopters and 100 counter-terrorism task force police. And was Kim a terrorist? No, Kim was not a terrorist. What was Kim accused of? Copyright infringement. This is the practical application of how this legislation gets used. It gets used to target political dissidents, people who the government does not like. It has not got a goddamn thing to do about being in ISIS or wherever the hell else. This is a smokescreen. The whole ISIS argument is a smokescreen. This absolutely will get used against journalists, it will get used against activists, it will get used against dissidents, it will get used against anybody that has meaningfully opposed the government or the intelligence agencies and the fellow partners in the global network, for example, the United States, and the rest of the Five Eyes. That's just the bottom line. This is just rife for abuse, and it's written all over this legislation when you read it. They want a way to punish and control, their word, control people who they know they don't have the evidence to take to court, who they know they don't have the evidence to arrest or to convict of anything. And the reason, the prime target, see an ISIS fighter, right? Some guy's running around on social media and whatever, having photos of himself with weapons and blah, blah, blah. They're not going to have any problems taking him to court and getting conviction. But they have a lot of problems trying to take someone like me to court. I mean, how the hell do they go to a court and say, oh, yeah, you know, the single mother from the suburbs, like, who has no military experience, no weapons, there's no history of violence, not a criminal, nothing. Oh, yeah, actually, we wanted to convict her under a terrorism act. No, they can't do that. They would have done that years ago if they'd been able to do that. But under a crazy regime like this control orders nonsense, they can just bypass that whole inconvenient situation of not actually having any evidence against me because I'm not actually a terrorist, and just call me one by association and just apply the punitive control order in total absence of any evidence, and then trap me back in New Zealand. So people ask me why I can't go home, and I feel like every year the New Zealand government just proves over and over and over again why I can't go home. And this is just like example number 55 in recent years. So I think that was the end of the thread. Yes, but there's lots of horrified people. So those are the screenshots that I took. But just to recap again, this bill allows authorities to deem you a terrorist on the balance of probability without showing evidence, and then control your work, finances, movements, net access, and prevent you telling anyone it's happening to you. They get to do this without arresting you, without prosecuting you, without you being convicted of anything. And any journalist who writes about it being done to you gets prosecuted for doing so. Best of all, even if you didn't know you were supporting or aiding a terrorist, and even if no terrorism happened, too bad. What this law does is effectively sentence you without a trial. Electronic monitoring, the whole 9 yards, but no trial, no defence, and you don't even get to see the evidence used in the process. And for those of you who would like to see the full legislation, I tweeted out the link to it right here. So you are welcome to come and click on this link, and you'll be able to read through the entire bill yourself. So that is definitely so important to oppose. And the battle now is going to be to force New Zealand journalists and politicians to address all of those key aspects that I've just raised. Because the statements by the New Zealand Greens, who are in opposition to the bill, and by Amnesty International New Zealand, do not mention those factors that I just raised. They are taking for granted the cover story of the bill, that it's just about foreign fighters, foreign actual terrorists, and have been opposing it on the grounds that foreign countries might have different definitions of terrorism to New Zealand than New Zealand. But the problem here is actually New Zealand's definition of terrorism. And we have seen basically throughout the entire history of the anti-terrorism task force in New Zealand, we have seen bungled operation after bungled operation after bungled operation, and none of them have been against terrorists. All of them have been against political dissidents or journalists or people like Kim.com who they hate and who they want to take down on behalf of foreign countries. This bill will be used to go after the enemies of America, not even the enemies of New Zealand. This bill will be used to go after the enemies of the global network. And those enemies won't just be terrorists or foreign fighters. They'll be anybody who's ideologically opposed to the activities and existence of the global network. And that absolutely encompasses people like Julian Assange, like myself, or anybody who's connected to any of those truth and justice-seeking organizations, that those few of us that remain in the public information sphere. So I'm just going to have a quick look at your comments and see what you guys think about that. And then I'll let you know a bit about what else has been going on this week. So just to let you know, this is going to be a really short stream tonight. because I'm actually not well. I don't know if you can tell. But I need to rest tonight, so I'm going to keep this super short. Now, I want to acknowledge the work of Coperenio, who's one of our volunteers on the Discord server. On our Discord server, we have an amazing group of people who have come together to donate their time and services and effort and care and love and attention to this 1 versus 5i campaign. By now, I assume that most of you will know that the 1 versus 5i campaign, which you can find at 1vs5i.com, is a campaign to support my legal actions against the New Zealand government and intelligence agencies who persecuted me for my activism and journalism and led me to have to live in exile with my family. And that campaign requires a lot of awareness raising and working to gain public support and outreach, and also lots of generating content like graphics and videos and web design and all kinds of things, social media support, and also raising donations so that we can keep me and my family in one piece through this time, and also to pay for the legal expenses for the campaign so that I can finally, hopefully, get some redress against the people, the agencies who've been persecuting me. And this campaign has been made possible by people who have volunteered to be a part of it. So the 2 major ways that you can help to make this campaign a success is by contributing to the war chest. I think we've already raised about 25% of what we need for the first phase of the lawsuits, which is a really great start, but we need to get it the rest of the way. And you can donate at 1vs5i.com/donate. And if you can't donate, which I totally understand, then advocating for other people to donate is as good as the donation. I deeply appreciate those of you who do proactively and on your own initiative get out there and spread that donation link around so that we can actually meet the targets and take action. The second way is to join our team of volunteers, and you can do that at 1vs5i.com/Discord. So I've done a lot of streams in the last few years. I did a lot of streams for Internet Party in 2017 in the anti-spy bill campaign. I did a lot of streaming for Uni4J last year in 2018. I've done a lot of streaming this year in 2019 as well for a variety of things, and particularly in this campaign. And of course, my Decipher You series, which I think was over 130 hours of live online journalism, analysing Snowden docs in real time. In all of that stream time, I've never really gotten too personal or let my feelings show in terms of the real impact of the reality of my situation, living in exile, upon me. Last week, last Sunday's stream in the series, I broke that mold and I sucked it up, and I really let you guys get a bit of a window into some of the emotional impact and psychological impact on myself and my family of the situation that was inflicted upon us. And I let you see some of the pain, and I let you see some of the impact of what we've been going through. And that was really difficult for me to do, but at the same time, I don't regret doing it because it's the truth. And I think giving our supporters the truth better empowers them to help us and to respond to it. And when I say we, I mean all of us who live in exile, all of us who are major targets of the intelligence agencies. I believe it's really important that we authentically convey to people exactly what we suffer through. rather than just trying to be strong and pretend it's all okay and whatnot while, things are not okay. So I don't regret doing it. I'm glad that I did do it, even though it was a really hard pill for me to swallow, and because I'm not really that type of person to sit around and have a cry. But it was definitely important to do. And this week, I have been humbled by the amazing efforts of Co Perennial and our video team in the 1vs5i.com Discord, who have taken edited segments from that session last week and have made a really beautiful, poignant, professional intro and outro for it, and have turned it into a really special segment. And the segment is, I think, about 28 or 29 minutes long now, but it really gets to the heart of what it's like to live in exile, and also to the impacts, not just on me, but to those who are closest to me and around me, and the other people who have been made to suffer as a result of my situation, namely my children and my family. So tonight we're going to premiere that clip that the video team have put together, and then we're going to actively promote it on social media in the coming weeks, because as important and significant as all the analysis work that I do, the geopolitics stuff that I cover, the document analysis and the long-form journalism and the streams and the diagrams and presentations, as important as all of that is, I think that the humanity can get lost, the personal impacts can get lost when we're just talking about everything in black and white and in figures. And as difficult as it is for me to allow myself to be vulnerable, I can see that the human impact, the human toll of what we put through is something that people are hungry to be able to grasp, and that they do identify with. So on that basis, I'm going to forego the usual Q&A session tonight, and I'm just going to come and hang out with you guys in the chat channels on social media while we play through this premiere of this clip that's been put together. We don't yet have a name for this clip, and I would appreciate it if you guys, as you watch it, think about what you think this should be called, because it definitely needs a name. And like I said, we'll be heavily circulating it in the weeks to come. So Kitty, our awesome tech chick, if you can go ahead and play that clip now. And to everyone watching, I'll come and chat with you in the various platforms for the next 20, 30 minutes or so while it plays. Thank you so much for being here tonight. In terms of this terrorism suppression control orders bill, I kind of feel like it needs a hashtag. That's what I was thinking today. This needs a hashtag that we can discuss this further on, and that we can aggregate information on. I think 1vs5i is not entirely the right place for it. It needs to be something specific to this bill. So over the next 24 hours, I'm going to come up with a hashtag, and I'll start tweeting on that hashtag about this bill, and let's start pressuring some New Zealand journalists and politicos to address the big picture around the bill and not just pretend it's about ISIS fighters, which I'm sorry is frankly bullshit. Thank you so much. I will come chat with you in text in a few minutes, and I will be back next week. We'll have a huge episode next week of Opening the Fighters. I'm not going to tell you what it is because it's too cool to tell you about, but it's going to be amazing. It's going to be an episode that will be referenced for years to come by many people. Okay, thank you all so much. See you soon. I just want to have a little chat with you guys about what has been going on with me. If you saw my Twitter timeline tonight, you would have seen that I nearly didn't do this stream tonight. In fact, for most of today, I was thinking to myself, I can't stream tonight. I can't stand the idea of being on camera and doing this. It wasn't because I was worried about the content or the campaign. I am really blessed and grateful that I even have the opportunity to run this campaign and to have a chance at obtaining some kind of justice. But I was overwhelmed for a lot of personal reasons, some of which I've decided that I'm going to share with you tonight. So there's been a lot going on for me. So this week, Nikki Hager, who is a very famous New Zealand investigative journalist who has written some seminal books about the intelligence agencies and who has himself been targeted by the same intelligence agencies who have targeted me, managed to get into the media this week official findings that the New Zealand spy agencies had spied on him. Every time there is a major development in my home country that relates to this type of targeting against people, for reasons that I don't understand entirely, I don't actually feel triumphant about it. I feel really upset about it for several reasons. Firstly, because it brings back every single thing that I've gone through, and also the impacts on the people around me and my kids and my family. But also because I feel a really deep sense of injustice, particularly because of the way that the media treated me in New Zealand, and because of there's just a lot of unresolved stuff. And particularly actually in relation to Nikki. I have no ill feeling for Nikki. To the contrary, I feel great admiration for him. And I'm very happy that he's able to achieve redress and he's able to get really high-level support, and that people understand the dangers that he faces and the things that he goes through. But one of the big criticisms of me that I've had, particularly from media, about my situation in my case, is they compare me to Nikki. They say, oh, well, Nikki is targeted and he didn't have to leave New Zealand, or, how come Nikki is able to be in New Zealand and you've had to leave New Zealand? And on one hand, it's quite a compliment to me that I would even be considered in the same light as Nikki Hager. But on the other hand, our situations are completely fundamentally different. And this is something that people who judge my decision to leave New Zealand seem to fail completely to understand. When Nikki was being targeted by the intelligence agencies, he had a 30-year long track record of internationally awarded journalism. Every single person in the country of New Zealand knows him and who he is and what he does and the risks that he faces. He has a ginormous international support network at the highest levels of journalism and of politics. When I was targeted in New Zealand, I had none of that. I was not an established journalist. I did not have major political support. I did not have an international network of people willing to advocate for me. There was no public understanding of who I was or what my work was or why I would be targeted, none whatsoever, because I had actually operated in my activism. I stayed anonymous, I stayed off camera, and I did everything behind the scenes. So I had no public support whatsoever. I had no media support whatsoever. My situation couldn't have been any more dramatically different than Nikki Hager's situation, and yet I'm constantly judged in the same light or the same league as Nikki Hager, which is really unfair. When I was targeted in New Zealand, I was a single mother with 2 kids living in the suburbs. I had nobody willing to stand up or protect for me or to advocate for me or to protect me. I had only my fellow media team members who were also being targeted and who had no resources and no ability to protect me. The police openly told me to my face that I would continue to be targeted, and that so their exact words were, so long as you're an activist, this will keep happening to you. So I couldn't do anything about it whatsoever. I was like a sitting duck, and nobody would protect me. Not politicians, not media, not the police, no state agencies. I had no ability to maintain safety for myself or for my children. So every time that another big revelation comes out in New Zealand that does vindicate me, such as the State Services Commission report that came out in 2018, and it confirmed that the exact same companies which I had been saying were doing this I'd been saying since 2012, 6 years before it was confirmed, I'd been saying exactly who's doing it, what they're doing, who they're doing it to. When that report came out, I should have been happy. I should have been like, thank God. Now everybody knows that what I was saying was true. I wasn't some crazy crackpot making this shit up. I was telling the truth all along. But to be honest, I didn't really feel vindicated. I felt miserable. I felt upset and miserable. And I put a public statement out actually on that day that the report was released. And you can tell how angry I am when you read that statement. I was just so angry at what I perceived was the total abandonment of me by anybody who could have actually helped me when I was in New Zealand. So leaving New Zealand for me was like stay and die quietly, or leave and have a chance at continuing my work and telling people what was going on. And so that's the option I chose. So it hurts, quite frankly. It hurts to be judged against people who have completely different situations and scenarios to me. And to have my decisions, which I felt like I had no other decision I possibly could make at the time, to have those decisions judged against the actions of people who have the types of visibility and protection and resources and support that I never, ever, ever had when I was in New Zealand. So that's the first thing that's bugging me. But then the second thing that's really hurting me too is every single day that I'm in exile, I see firsthand the impacts of that exile upon my kids and my family, but primarily my kids. And I've chosen tonight to actually start to talk about this. And for me, it's a humongous risk. For me to talk about the things that upset me and the things that I'm going through is an absolutely humongous risk. It's a risk for multiple reasons. First of all, because I inevitably am blamed for what's been done to me, despite the fact that I'm not the person who did it. And it's a risk because the people who continue to persecute me use anything that I say or anything that I disclose to continue to persecute me and continue to hurt me. And for me, it's always been a really double-edged sword as to whether or not I talk about my kids. And so generally, other than saying that I have children, I've said basically nothing about them. But the impacts on my parenting of the children when I was in New Zealand being targeted were absolutely devastating. And the impacts on my ability to parent in exile are similarly devastating. The invasion of privacy is next level. I remember in New Zealand knowing that every word I said in my home was being recorded, and my daughter asking me to tell her about the birds and the bees, and me having to sit there and try and explain to my child the facts of life, and particularly the facts of being a girl and becoming a woman, knowing that every word I said was being scrutinized by security agencies that had it in for me and were trying to destroy me. I feel like they robbed me and my children of some of the most precious moments and precious years of our life, and things that normal parents can just take for granted, I could never take for granted. And I had to constantly make decisions relating to my children. Wow, I'm sorry, I didn't know how upsetting this would be to talk about. I had to constantly make decisions relating to my children in the realistic and practical context of us being targeted by the state. For example, I lived in constant fear. One of the things my daughter complained about to me is she always says, "Mum, you're hypervigilant." And she's talking about, not about hypervigilant about being targeted, but hypervigilant in terms of, I would live in fear that my kids would be jumping off the trampoline or whatever, would hurt themselves and would end up having to go to hospital for whatever reason, and that it would be used as a pretext to take my children away from me, to punish me for my activism and journalism. Because there are countless other cases where this has been done to activists and journalists who are single parents, where they come at you through your kids. That's what it comes down to. They come at you through your children. They have no qualms about doing that. So my kids couldn't just play like normal kids. Like when I was a kid growing up, I broke my wrist, I broke my arm, I broke my leg. It didn't matter. My parents went and took me to the hospital, get a cast on it, no one cared. But as a single mother who's a targeted activist and a journalist, I would literally be running around after my kids like, watch that step, careful of this, careful of that, don't blah, 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 constantly on at them, be careful, be safe, be careful, be safe, like to a ridiculous degree, because something as simple as my kids having an accident and breaking their arm could be used as a pretext to destroy our domestic life and destroy our life together and potentially even separate us. That's the type of pressure that I, and subsequently they, by proxy, had to live under as targets. Going into exile there are whole other layers to that. There's the obvious isolation. Sorry. There is incredible isolation. There's incredible isolation that we face because we lost our family, access to our family. We lost all of our friends. We lost our entire support network in terms of social support network and our personal community. My kids lost their friends, their belongings, which are still to this day sit in storage in New Zealand because I don't know even whether I'll gain temporary residency here and be able to move their stuff to them. They lost their home that they grew up in. They lost the ability to learn and to speak their native language like every other child in New Zealand does. They lost the carefree and attentive parent that I was to them when it was just us in New Zealand. I used to be fun and have fun with them in ways that I had no ability to do since, because I am constantly need focused. I have to live in a way that's need focused. I have to make sure that we still have a place to live in, still have a country to live in, still have an apartment to live in, make sure that we have food, make sure that we have clothes, make sure that we have all of the necessities, and to do so without anyone around me to facilitate any of that happening. And that means I'm not fun mum, I'm stressed mum almost all the time. And that has been horrendous. And then you add on to that the language barrier and the fact that none of us spoke the language. And then you add on to that the fact that I'm constantly probed and I don't mean probed by Russians or locals. I'm not. I've had no interference at all from Russians. But I am constantly probed by intel agents in all of the spaces in which I try to communicate or operate relentlessly. They want information however they can get it. They want to insert people in my life and get people close to me. I had to cope with that physically in the real world in New Zealand, but I have to cope with it in digital spaces all of the time. And so my way of coping with the isolation was to overwork. And so in 2017 Internet Party campaign and 2018 Unity for J, I worked every second and every moment that I wasn't with the kids, day and night. I did 20 hours days every day. I worked so hard that I would look out the window and the light would burn my eyes. Looking at daylight would burn my eyes and blind me. That was how I coped with the situation, was just to work and work and work. And then, of course, my body started to give out on me, because nobody can work 20-hour days, 7 days a week forever and ever and ever. So that is why I stepped down from Unity for J, and that's why I took a bit of a break at the beginning of this year. And my one accomplishment in recent times is that I have actually hauled my ass back to the gym and started getting in physical shape again and started trying to improve my health by necessity, because I can't help anyone, let alone my kids, if I don't do that, if I don't make that effort and do that. So the reason that I'm talking about these things tonight is because I've been feeling so heartbroken and so vulnerable, and I have really nobody to talk about this stuff with. And I remembered something. So behind the scenes, I used to never really talk in a personal context about Julian or WikiLeaks or anything else, but I'm starting to change my mind on some of this stuff. So I can tell you that behind the scenes, I was pretty much campaigning for years for Julian Assange to talk more in the public realm about what he was suffering through, what he was going through, physically and mentally and emotionally. I thought that it was really important for people to understand how dire his situation was, because recently you've heard about this, since he's been silenced, you've heard a lot about it. But in the previous years, Julian had really presented himself, I'm not even sure deliberately, but he presented himself as being pretty invulnerable and like a Superman. And people looked at him like a superhero. And they didn't understand the reality of what he was suffering through every single day. Nobody really understood that, because the decline in his health isn't something that has just happened since the hideous Moreno government. It's been going on for the entire decade. Julian was suffering in 2010. He was suffering in 2011. He was suffering in 2012. He was suffering in 2013. But nobody really understood the ways in which he was suffering. So after I made the suggestion a number of times, Julian did actually release his medical records. And that was a significant moment, and it was a very Julian way to address the issue, because he provided documented facts from accredited professionals to disclose information about himself that could then be referenced by journalists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was definitely a Julian way to handle it, and it was a good way to handle it. But Julian, like many of our men, and I would say Ed also, yeah, you're one of the people who is also guilty of this. Our men don't like to be vulnerable, and particularly when they know that their adversaries are high the highest level adversaries in the world who will exploit any weakness and who will exploit any vulnerability. They don't like to show vulnerability. Our men don't like to show vulnerability. And they like to project strength, and they like to attract people to themselves through invulnerability and strength and being powerful. A lot of people tell me all the time that I'm really strong, and it puzzles me because I don't feel strong. I haven't really felt strong through any of this. I've kind of just been in a constant state of having to attempt to deal with what's happening to me in real time as it's happening. I've never felt particularly strong, but people constantly tell me I am strong, and I think it's because they confuse the strength of my convictions with some type of personal invulnerability or superpower. And I'm telling you, I'm definitely not invulnerable, and I definitely don't have some superpower. And I'm also hyper aware that those who target us know full well how miserable we are sometimes, how much stress we're going through, how hideous what we're going through is. They know that because they spy on us. They were, as we now know, they were spying on Julian every second of every day in every room, including the bathroom, and broadcasting it live to Langley, Virginia, to CIA headquarters. So they knew how Julian was suffering. They watch and study the effects on us targets of what they do to us. We are like lab rats to them. They will tailor their targeting of other people based on the impacts that they gauge from monitoring the effects of what they have done to us. So what use is it for us to hide from the people who do love us and do support us and do care about us? What use is it to hide our suffering and what we're going through? I think it's not very much use at all. And so that's why that's what brought me to the decision to try and tell you a little bit. I mean, that's just a tiny window that I gave you tonight, a little bit of what we go through. If you've ever had someone really highly manipulative in your life who lies to you for an extended period of time and lies to you about fundamental things which relate to why you even chose to engage in any type of relationship with them in the first place, you'll understand that when you inevitably find out the truth, which you always do, that you feel like they stole a piece of your life from you. Because if they had told you the truth up front, you would have made different decisions. That's how I feel about this entire process of being targeted, and it's how I feel about my children and my family as well. I feel like years of our lives were stolen, have been stolen, and arguably still are being stolen. Had they not done to us what they did, I would never even become an investigative journalist. I would never have become any type of expert in the insane and disgusting things that they do to us every day. They created me in that sense. They created my investigative journalism. They created my activism by waking me up.
Hi, my name is Suzie. I'm an activist and a journalist from Auckland, New Zealand. For years, I've worked on controversial issues like the corruption of our intelligence agencies. I was severely targeted as a result of my work. This led to my articles being amplified by the world's most accomplished publisher. In 2016, I made a documentary about how and why I was forced to leave my country. I have now sought refuge in Russia, and my situation has become public.
On 882 6PR, the voice of Perth.
It's 12:30 right now, and Tony with you, and I'm really happy we finally got through to Moscow to my friend over there, Suzie Dawson.
You're listening to a 95BFM podcast.
Suzie Dawson is a Kiwi activist and journalist who worked as a member of Occupy Auckland's media team at that time. Now, 5 years later, and following involvement in GCSB and TPPA opposition, she's seeking asylum in Russia, alleging she has been spied on, harassed and threatened by the police.
Welcome back to The Wire. Now, finally on the show today, last week it was announced that Suzie Dawson will be the new leader of the Internet Party.
Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We have a special guest with us. It's Suzie Dawson. She's an activist, journalist, former party leader and current president of the Internet Party.
Suzie Dawson, an activist and citizen journalist currently seeking asylum in Moscow. Suzie has written extensively on surveillance and the deep state and claims it's not safe for her in New Zealand.
My name is Craig Tuck. I'm a lawyer from New Zealand. I act in the area of international human rights. I act for Suzie Dawson, along with a group of other lawyers throughout the world who act for journalists and dissenters in high-profile cases, including the case of Julian Assange. As far back as 2012, Suzie has been trying to warn New Zealanders and other citizens around the world about state targeting and surveillance of citizens and the methods being used to do it.
Surveillance in New Zealand is now so widespread, it's not an issue of police going and getting a warrant and doing an investigation and then it all coming out in court. The vast majority of the surveillance that's undertaken is never going to be aired in a courtroom. And by that I'm talking about cell phone technologies. I'm talking about lawful interception is the term that the companies that do this like to use. There is a corporation in Wellington, New Zealand called SSI Corp. And you can Google them and you can look at their website. And on their website, they're so good as to explain at length exactly what they do and how legal it is for them to do it. And essentially, they can intercept virtually any communication. If they have someone at range, they can hear your actual conversations, but also through cell phones, they can essentially turn them into microphones and hear any conversation that's had within vicinity. They can see your text messages, they can see what photos are on your phone, they can see what files are on your phone, they can read your emails, they can just intercept all kinds of information.
Any intelligence service in the world that has significant funding and a real technological research team can own that phone the minute it connects to their network. As soon as you turn it on, it can be theirs. They can turn it into a microphone, they can take pictures from it, they can take the data off of it. But it's important to understand that these things are typically done on a targeted basis.
Not only was Suzie essentially blowing a whistle on state-level spying, she was naming the precise entities that years later it would be proven had in fact been doing it.
And the fact that these are private corporations that are doing it should be really concerning to us. The crowd that they outsourced it to was TCIL, which was, I believe, Thompson and Clark Investigations Limited. The state is contracting a private company to surveil you. To me, that's really immoral, absolutely immoral.
Some 6 years later, in December 2018, an official State Services Commission report confirmed that New Zealand government agencies had been employing Thompson and Clark Investigations Limited to target New Zealand citizens. This is a private company that had essentially been instructed by state agencies and departments to spy on citizens.
More than a dozen police staff are under investigation for passing sensitive information to the private investigators Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark. Security firm Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark.
So Thompson and Clark, aren't some of them old police officers?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so does that explain the relationship and the free flow of information? Doesn't it actually seem a bit crass?
Well, at the end of the day, I guess what I trust is people's intent.
The report identifies perhaps inappropriately close relationships, morning teas paid for by Thompson and Clark, invitations to go out for drinks. Were there other companies identified where you inappropriately gave them information, or just Thompson and Clark?
There are a myriad of security companies who inquire of police every day. For instance, insurance security.
But that's not my question. People listening to this will think, hey, Thompson and Clark were getting stellar, top shelf, gold star treatment from the police. Why? Do you treat other security firms the same as you were treating this one? Yeah. How do you seriously think it looks to members of the public listening to this?
Thompson and Clark hasn't just been paid by the government to spy on Greenpeace and earthquake claimants in Christchurch. Tonight, Checkpoint can reveal the controversial security firm has been also monitoring the activities of another 3 activist groups in Northland, Coromandel and Wellington, and the activities of at least 1 further claimant.
Suzie has been involved at the very highest levels, with people facing charges from prosecutions coming out of the Eastern District Court of Virginia in the United States. There are more prosecutions to follow of currently unnamed persons. Importantly, information will be coming out in the months to come that will provide transparency and clarity and lead to accountability. Suppression and prosecution of dissenters can't be allowed in New Zealand or elsewhere. That's why Suzie's team is launching the hashtag 1versus5i campaign, and with your help can achieve some important victories for democracy and for each and every one of us.